So it's the Trained by Fox podcast here. This week we have Luke Miller on the podcast. We'll let him introduce himself first and he can describe what we're going to discuss today.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on, man. I'm really excited to kind of dive into this topic. It's something that I'm giving a really in-depth presentation on at my seminar in a couple weeks. So it's been kind of in my head for myself in that presentation. But I run a coaching business. It's No Switch Fitness, where we take no all switch in the pursuit of results. I primarily deal with physique athletes, competitors. That's like 99% of my business. Alongside of doing like a lot of the educational content with my seminars and things along those lines. My background is I have a couple degrees. I have a mechanical engineering degree alongside a master's in exercise science.
Is that where you did all your Excel stuff?
Yeah, so the engineering is where I did all the Excel stuff. I did a lot of orthotic, prosthetic, football helmet impact design type stuff. So I was doing a lot of biomedical based work as an engineer. And then I transferred it into the physiology side with the grad degree and just kind of followed my passion of coaching that I'd already started and really just kind of found my niche and like helping people through coaching and educating and raising the standard of the industry. So with the topic today, man, like going through like physique pictures and needs analysis and mapping out training according to that.
Basically, you're going to rip my pictures apart and tell me that everything I'm doing is wrong.
We're not gonna. We're gonna be in a positive growth mindset here, but I think one of the big things is like I think people undervalue that initial process of taking that time to do that. It is a little bit more iterative than people realize, and I think that taking the time to do it is what separates a little bit more accurate program design to the individual rather than just training off templates.
I saw Kai Green selling training plans. Look at him. He's a monster. Surely that's all I need to do.
No, not exactly how that works. There's got to be a cross of anecdotal and actual understanding there. Not all of us have the genetic potential of a Kai Green, unfortunately.
I don't think he's ever won an Olympia, though, has he? He's not that.
No,
not that gifted. Come on. Anyway. So, as Luke says, I'm going to be the guinea pig essentially here to help you understand Luke's mindset and thought processes into the decisions he makes with programming. Shall I go ahead and pull up the photos, or do you want to go into?
Yeah, let's go ahead and pull up the photos. That's where it starts with. So initially, like basically going off of no information with photos. The starting process will be building out the needs analysis from a photo perspective solely. So this is most of the time kind of in a state of not seeing any training footage, not seeing any information as far as like possible injury profiles or anything along those lines. And then kind of going from there, mapping out what we typically see are the rate limiters of development in the areas where we might be lacking, and then going from there. So some of this will show up a little bit more in the compulsories too. But when we look at these relaxed shots, if you go left to right on the screen, first things that pops out are going to be quads or standout body parts, especially from the front. It's definitely one of those body parts that's ahead of the development of the rest of the physique. Adductors are probably getting close to that. And then as we kind of go up the chain, we're looking at lat and chest as the standout weak points from the front. When it comes to looking at that front shot, slight posing issue with the front relax, where you have a lot of arm thickness and shoulder that's not showing, because you can kind of see the shoulder development in your side shots, especially when you start getting into, I cheated. I looked at some of these pictures beforehand. Start looking at like some of the actual pose size shots. You can kind of see the delt and arm development is pretty close on par. And you can see it in the side quarter too. We see like quads pretty dominant relative to the hamstring glutes. My eyes kind of drawn to the hamstring as like a weak point. And then Yeah, and then density through the chest on the same side camera, which will partially be conditioning, right? So that this will come through as you get leaner. So this is one of those things where it's good, guys, where if you build this needs analysis out, you're doing it in a leaner body state so you can actually kind of see where the things are at. I would argue this is kind of at that point where building a needs analysis is pretty good. But thickness across the top, again, hamstring on the other side quarter, and glutes a little bit. But when you go to the back, you kind of really start to see the glute hamstring discrepancy relative to quads. So
now I need to point out that I pull these up to hide what this is.
Yeah.
As much as I can.
Figured.
There's definitely some hormonal imbalances in this area.
Mm-hmm.
What shall I pull up now?
Let's go ahead and pull up like a front double, a side chest, and a back double for me. Because this is where we're going to start to really get into understanding or having a discussion around possible rate limiters of the physique here. So if you look at the front shot, you can really kind of see the structural rib cage presentation is probably a large rate limiter for you. So structurally, rib cage, we're typically discussing on a spectrum of like a large to a narrow subcostal angle. So that wide open bucket handle, open pump handle rib cage presentation is probably a large reason why we're seeing a little bit of trouble with the midsection control, a little bit of trouble with the lat development here because of that rib cage presentation. So this is a structural presentation that we need to learn to outfunction. So typical rate limiters we see when we see a front double that presents with this open pump handle, open buck handle issues are going to arise is going to be bracing capacity, following breath cycle within training patterns appropriately, rib cage position relative to the patterns that you're doing, which sounds all fancy, but essentially what it is just gaining access to aligning fibers to oppose the force in a mechanically disadvantaged position. So stereotypical for bodybuilders is going to be lat work. And this is probably why we see the lat development a little bit underdeveloped. So the classic overhead pull down, right? What is the position that we see people do lat work in? It's that arch, right? It may be a tucked elbow position, but they're always in that thoracic extended chest up arched back position, right?
Yeah, that's probably what I do.
Yeah, and you can create tension through your lats there, but that's only because that's the only way that you can create tension through your lats because of your rib cage presentation or your function around your rib cage presentation, right? So this is where pieces like the Nautilus high pull, where the Nautilus high pull, where it's like a single arm, but it's
single arm and it kind of adjusts.
Yeah, and it's on that 75 plane instead of vertical.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the best pieces for people with your rib cage structure, because now we can start to keep that rib cage tucked down. We can use breath cycle to increase output. We aren't exposing where you're weak by being in this vertical position that you can't actually get in without altering the position of the rib cage. And we can now begin to output a lot better in that position. So secondarily, we're also starting to address positionally a spot that you would need in order to lower that pump handle and bucket handle presentation within posing. Now, there's a lot more that goes into that, and that's probably maybe not a discussion for today, but like that's typically the first rate limiter within lat development that we see when we see a front double like this. It's like, okay, this guy probably can't positionally get into the places that he needs to drive tension through his lat appropriately. What exercise selections will allow me to have him not only be in the right position, but drive tension through his lats? And so we're thinking like this single arm, 75-degree lat pull, where you don't have to stay in this fully extended position as like position number one. Obviously, you'll have row positions as well. but then learning to set those up appropriately with the equipment that you have. And am I correct in the fact that you arch for pull downs and don't fully have the overhead access reach and things along those lines?
I literally, I'll use with a pull down, it's traditionally a D-handle kind of neutral grip.
Yeah.
And I'm probably stood, like if I'm on a bend, I'm here and I'll drag down into here.
Yeah.
If I'm say I'm seated under the lat, I'm kind of here again and I pull here.
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing I do. Like you could probably see that I'm comfortable here.
Yeah, but you can't get into
I'm
that.
very, like, I feel rear delt here.
Yeah.
It is probably a mobility issue.
And it's partly too something that you can kind of start to tinker with programming, right? Is using that. So that's something that jumps out to me straight out the gate. And then you kind of go to the training videos to see if that presents. Now the side chest is a good shot. So this is where some of the chest thickness issues that you see in like the side quarter turns kind of start to go away when you're able to pose. Is like,
yes,
you see that back chest come a little bit fuller. You see the arm thickness, especially through the bicep and the shoulder. I would say tricep is partially behind, partially covered by tattoos. And the biggest thing is the hamstring here. So again, we're kind of finding that the hamstring is the big rate limiter.
yes.
Glutes a little bit, but hamstring is really the big rate limiter, followed by a little bit of tricep and chest development when we look at like the side tricep and the side chest.
You can literally see it from that back portion of my arm. It's literally just flat.
Yeah. And so again, this is going to be one of those things where what are the typical things that we run into from an issues perspective when it comes to hamstring development? And we had talked about this off camera is you can see his glutes developed relative to his hamstrings are a little bit further ahead. So he probably has a propensity to drive glute tension over hamstring tension in most patterns, whether it be like the RDL or any kind of hip hinge variation pattern. So we're going to be looking to possibly deprioritize that within programming. You
did take my RDL off me.
Hey man, you asked how to get better. You didn't ask how to get.
No. I'll do the necessary.
Yeah, so it may be one of those things that's like it's one set of RDL and that's all you take, and you take it on an every other week basis, right? This is very common within, again, the rib cage presentation on the left. Is you'll see that we have, and I would imagine you have ankle mobility issues just with the development presentation. Squat patterns have a tendency to be wider stance A-frame, more hip travel away from the bar. Hip hinge is a strong pattern for you, things like that, right? So now we're starting to build these things with the initial pictures. Like I can now start to have a conversation with him about, am I right in these assumptions? And then once I'm starting to filter through like, okay, do you have a movement capacity issue here? Are you driving tension on these patterns here relative to here more? And those are the things on needs analysis I'm writing out as I'm going through each pose, basically marking down what stands out as the biggest weak points, what just needs to develop at a normal rate of physique development, and what's the strongest body parts, right? And so that's kind of like from the front, the ones that's biggest behind is going to be the lats, with a little bit of tricep development from the front, just so that you get that bottom hang to match the bicep development. From the side, we said hamstrings, maybe a little and tricep as your main things that are jumping out on both side shots. And so then you kind of take it to the back, you have a back double.
Say that last part again, Luke.
I said, do you have the back double so that we can kind of transition?
Yeah, sorry. There was some noise in the background of my ass, and then I didn't actually see that. Right, back double.
I would like to comment on the calf development here, though. Good God Almighty.
The what?
I
think it's size 11 feet, arthritis in my hip, and being a very fat kid. I'd say that was probably one of the only few genetic things my mum gave me. And she was a hobbit.
And so this back double is really where you start to see the comment of, okay, maybe the shoulders aren't quite as behind as they present looking in like just the relaxed shots, is because you see him pull into this back double, and the delts set the frame very well. And then you get into like Terry's lat development, which we discussed partly. This presentation of back double is body composition related, but Terry's off of the shoulder is going to need to kind of create more of that X frame with development. Lats, especially a little bit of mid trap, lower trap thickness, are the things that kind of jump out in this back shot. Now the hamstrings don't really jump out as a huge weakness other than from like a conditioning point, except for the adductor gap. So the adductor gap is a little bit more apparent from the rear, where in the front they're touching very well. So then like your rate limiters within this shot, as the ones that you mark as the most exposing, are going to be Terry's and lats, with a little bit of triceps for matching the delt development within that back double. And then adductors to fill in the quad hangover on the outside, the hamstring development, and then matching that inner development within the adductors. So the back double alongside the front double are probably your two biggest rate limiter shots.
Let's drag these
over. Yeah. So these are probably your two biggest rate limiter shots, because it exposes the biggest weak points within the program. And again, we kind of already discussed the structural representation limiting access to some of this development that we need, right? And so programming, as we kind of go, are going to be, one, before sessions, we're going to be addressing it, like some of these issues within pre-session prep work. And then we need to use this to pick patterns. But scoot that back double over to the lat spread real quick for me.
Like that?
Yeah, just like that. And so like this is where you can kind of see like the upper back's a little bit better than the lat development, right? Is because we set the frame a little bit better across the top. I would argue rear delts need a little bit more development to set the separation from delt to lats here, or delt to teres. And then you can kind of see the lats starting to come out, but we need more out from the hip from the lats. And it actually, this shot shows your back a little bit better than the back double. Obviously that's pretty standard for most people.
I'm able to hide my hips.
I was about to say, because you're able to hide your hips. And so this is partly like structurally, this pose is always going to look better on you than the back double, just because of positionally where you're at. And then from there, looking at making it pop more. So the things that make it pop more tricep to add a little bit more X frame on it, more rear delts, get more separation from back into shoulders. And again, this is part of the illusion of lines starting to come in as well. So I'll be curious to see this lat spread as you get leaner, because as that waist comes in, as those lines come through, this will probably be a little bit of a better shot on you.
DMP couldn't even save that waist.
But so like we're starting to map out like what are the recurring weak body parts, right? So lats, primary number one. Primary number two is probably going to be hamstrings, especially from like the side shots. And primary number three is going to be a matching tricep rear delt, because we've noted both on the side shots and on the rear shots that we're lacking some of that depth when it comes to separation of rear delt tricep from both of the back shots, that thickness from the back end of the arm that would allow for density across both of the side shots to be a little bit higher. And yeah, see, like you can see it in there within that contest photo.
This was 2014, 59 kilogram.
That's a lot of kilos ago. But even here, like you see the presentation of like a little bit less rear delt relative to back. Wow, the quad development from these pictures to now is unreal. Holy shit. But you can kind of see that. Yeah, and then you kind of pull it into the lat spread and then hide the waist a little bit. So
look at the hips still.
Yeah, that's partly getting fully skinned inside out, and partly structural representation.
Anyway, that's enough of my anorexic days.
All right. So typically what I would do is I would map all this out on a sheet of paper, and then we would be having this conversation we're kind of having now. Like, okay, do you present with these mobility issues? We know that you structurally present in this manner. And so how can we address that within training program and things along those lines? And then that's where we're going to start to have a conversation about what do you get out of all of these movements? What movements are you using? How do you move? And what can we do to improve those movements? And so this is where the video feedback starts to come. And this is where, as a coach, it's very important to do this in a team-like manner, because there's going to be a lot of patterns that you get a lot out of that we're going to be able to utilize within the program. And if I don't know that you get a lot out of these patterns, then I'm probably going to miss it within the program writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would have that conversation of like all of these movement discrepancies that we've talked about. We've talked a little bit about ankle mobility issues, driving tension through the glutes, a little bit of maintaining rib cage position, probably through some of these patterns, which would come with the training videos, and then creating cues around each pattern in order to keep that person in that position. And so this is where we start to now morph the needs analysis a little bit. Because I may be writing things on this needs analysis that present commonly. And then I watch training videos and this doesn't present within the way that he moves. Right. And so this is where like we need to start having that communication and that open dialogue of, okay, it's not a coach dictator, this is your program. It's a coach sees this, is this true relative to what you've been doing?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's one of the biggest missing pieces is like now that needs analysis becomes a live document. So it's not so much live in the fact that, okay, we can't change, it won't change what's your weak body parts, but it may change the solutions in which we create in order to address these weak body parts. And so this is one of those dynamics that you admit you're struggling with having an objective eye. We're having that conversation with someone outside objective eye. If you want to walk them through like some of the things you're struggling with as far as handling your own training at the moment.
I think as well, like just listening to you so far is, and I'm very subjected to it because probably for the last 2.5 years, I've done my own programming, I've done my own nutrition. And nutrition, I'm very much in a sense robotic around it all. But with training, I'll kind of go, and I've been a robot for a long time, and then through training with Cal over the last 2 years, we've kind of gone from gym to gym, from system to system. We did fortitude, we did this, and we've always reverted back to a large amount of, say, top set and back off, that sort of approach.
Yeah.
And then we've all, me and Cal in the sense, apart from he's a great kind of barbell squatter. Considering he sits on his ass at a desk all day, he can move with a barbell on his back. It's unbelievable. Whereas mine, whether it's excuses or what, arthritis in my hip, ankle problems, and the lack of attention to mobilization of that joint, I don't care for. And then so some of my choices go more towards like a hack squat, a leg press, or something like that. And then my pull sessions will be like a chest supported row and RDL, an ISO row or stuff. So movements you've mentioned and weaknesses you've said, like you brought up obviously rear delt. That is you like just like biceps and triceps. They're usually movements that I place at the back of a session, and my energy is depleted at the end, and I'm just like, that'll do. See you later, donkey. I've had enough.
Yeah, and so that's funny you say that, because that streamlines into the first part of moving the needs analysis into a program is priority principle, right? Is, okay, once we've mapped out and had this conversation of, okay, these are our rate limiters. And the way that I do this is I do it pose for pose on a document. So I have each pose on a document and I map out in 3 categories, which are either stronger body parts needs to continue to develop at normal rate, or weak body parts that need to develop faster relative to the rest of physique, and do that for each pose so that we're on the same page. And then we take that and prioritize that within the program for priority principles. So that's just going to be taking the limited opportunities for maximal output that you have and placing it on the body parts that need the most development across the time block.
Which I think like the program I'm following now is within, let's say, a lower session, I'll have adductor, a hamstring curl, a leg extension, hamstring curl, and then a squat movement, which is new to me, and it messes with my head. And then I'll come away, which this plan is nice. It's just having that squat variation to be the fifth movement is not good for my ego. The every logbook I've ever owned is getting burnt for just not having records of previous moves. Yeah. And then my actual legs, because I've probably been able to get areas a lot shorter and contract a lot harder than I previously have by doing them after. So yeah, I think priority needs to kick in here.
Yeah, and it's like asking that question is like, we know mechanical tension is the main driver of hypertrophy. We understand that mechanical tension is an internal stimulus, so it's not strictly the load on the bar, it's the tension in which we create within the fibers of tissues when we refer to it in a hypertrophy sense. And so what setup allows for someone to be able to do that at the greatest capacity, right? And like, especially if we're talking like hamstrings, like if we move it into like a hamstring focused pull day or a leg day, like getting that hamstring short before we eccentrically load it, 9 times out of 10 for someone who can't direct tension to their hamstrings is going to allow them to direct even more tension to their hamstrings, right? We're increasing neural capacity. We're getting it short into a contractile range when it's fresh. We typically see capacity for fibers to create tension to work better from moving from shortened into lengthened. So having that session order represent that. And arguably, probably for you, having the eccentric loading of a pattern that loads the lengthened position the most, not being a hip hinge because of your propensity to drive tensity through your glutes.
Which is, yeah, I think we can, I can confirm guilty.
It's a tough one because people like you and me are born to hip hinge. And then, so that's the conversation of like enjoyment versus objective, right? So how can we find a middle ground? And typically that's going to be an every third week allowing you to hip hinge type thing. So you still get that enjoyment factor. You look forward to it, but you're still doing the objective work. Would
that need a tutorial on the third week to remember how to do it? That feels forever.
I don't know, man. People who are pretty good at hip hinging, typically it's like riding a bike, right? As long as they do it in a few weeks, it's not too hard to keep it in play. But and then you kind of map it out within the session structure to make sure that you're prioritizing these body parts appropriately, and then using frequency as a volume metric. So we understand that higher frequencies will allow for higher output because we're visiting that body part fresher with each time, as long as the session volume beforehand isn't too high. And so using that as a metric to exacerbate the priority principle even further so, right? So we can now take opportunities more frequently where you're fresh to drive the most tension that we possibly can.
I think you need to have Luke and then a middle name of Bespoke Master in between your name, because I think I've spoken to many coaches and like I essentially map out people's programs around what you kind of says, pictures, highlighting, putting it in, but nowhere near as like, to me, I've always gone off of my kind of rule book of programming. And then listening to you is like, okay, that makes sense of right. I've got weak rear delts. I'm going to put rear delts towards the beginning of that session because now I know. And I've done that before with biceps. I've done it before with calves, because if calves aren't getting trained at the beginning of the session, they're not getting trained. But I think that's a very good, valid point. I'm going to come off of these pictures of my nudes.
Yeah, go ahead. And I think it's challenging, right? Because it forces critical thinking to be able to do that. And most coaches don't want to critically think when they're setting up people's programs. Because now when you do it in this manner of needs analysis, communicate with the client, create the needs analysis as a live document to see if the rate limiters you mapped out are actual rate limiters for the injured individual, it now presents a case by case study that has to be addressed in a different manner each time. And so you can't play by a rule book, right?
No.
You may have solutions for problems that are pretty stereotypical. Like I would guarantee with your rib cage presentation that you have some like internal, external oblique issues. You probably have rotation issues. You probably can't really fully. So we see that you're smushed, right? I don't have a water bottle, but essentially like your rib cage is smushed this way. So A to P. Yeah. So like if you were to smush that bottle, you would see that it's like that rib cage presentation is you're wide from the front view, but from the side view, you're very narrow. Right. And so that's kind of the physique presentation that you have is because of your structural rib cage.
Yeah.
And so that rib cage presentation is going to have functional issues that we now need to address within the program. And that's going to come with pre-prep work and appropriate sequencing of some of the exercises, but still keeping it within the confines of bodybuilding, because you can't overly change structure, but you can improve how well you function around that structure. And that will lead to better development around that structure where you don't really see those weak points come up. And so that's kind of like the thought process you have to go through. And then we kind of start to have that conversation and go into mapping out the program from there. When you've in the past, when you've like trained before, you mentioned like biceps, triceps, rear delts taking a back seat. Is the frequency model typically still within the confines of 2 times per week for every body part?
So pretty much, I'm literally, I don't know if anyone can kind of, you read that?
Yeah, you see it. So pull, push, off, lower, arms, delts, off.
So there'll be a day off here.
Yeah.
And then one here. So like there is at the end of each pull session, there's one bicep movement.
Yeah.
And then within the push session, there's a tricep movement. And then we go back to, which you can see here, the rear delts.
Yeah, very bottom, right?
Rear delts here, calves, triceps. And even then, like what I'm trialing now is RDL here, where normally it would be here.
Yeah, so that's like a good step in the right direction, right? But if you look at that, you keep that board up, you're only hitting lat/back development once every 6th day. If I did that right,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th day.
7th day.
Yeah.
Is it 6? So 1, 2, no.
Yeah,
1,
once every 6.
2. Yeah, every 6.
And so you're leaving a lot on the frequency table there, right? We know that lat priority is like rate limiter number 1, lat and hamstring biggest ones out the gate, right? And so I'm looking at this program and it's like, okay, there's a lot of places where we can improve the quality of the volume, where the quantity doesn't have to drive up by introducing a better frequency model. And so that would be the things that start going through my head when I look at this is like, okay, we know quads are very dominant for you. So we can kind of sit that on the back burner for a bit, and then we can take our opportunities to move priority up for frequency within lat and hamstrings, and then go from there. Because you're touching hamstrings pretty frequently, but then the lats are not getting that out of some movement choices that you have within there. So that's kind of like now go ahead.
Sorry, this comes down to basically one of my good friends is we've basically said to each other we're going to try and hold each other accountable, and I says, well, if you're going to do that, mate, I need to stop my training now. And he went and wrote his, sent it over, and I did look at it, and I was like, this is based on you, you prick. This isn't me. And then for me, it was just kind of, you know what? I just need a system. I just need some routine. He's giving it me. Let's go. But like talking about my week, because again, I'm very much business driven at the moment, very much about my coaching service. So my goals, aspirations with physique development just took a backseat, but then I partially blame that on not having anyone holding me accountable.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you particularly do with your nutrition, but I've got macros listed, I've got a meal plan written, and I guarantee you, if I'm at this computer for long enough, that meal plan's not getting hit. I'm thinking, right, okay. So they do a pita bread, they do breaded chicken, they do oven cooked chicken. Order me that. Nando's are doing Uber Eats. I'll get 2 of them.
And yeah. And so I think one of the things too, just so that we don't leave like the viewers or the listeners thinking, is maybe placing some actions towards some of the comments, right? And so we can obviously, and we're going to probably do a part 2 where we actually map out like a split design of some sort. But one of the things that obviously gets left on the table is like, okay, so this might be the first time some of your listeners have heard like the structural representation presenting functional issues down the line, right? And like, how are we going to address that? Well, we can't get rid of the primary patterns that are going to drive force and tension throughout the tissues that we need it, right? Like that's just non-negotiables for the main goal, which is still bodybuilding, right?
Yeah.
But when we start to present a case-by-case study of like, how do we fix issues? We now have to look at both what are we doing prior to the session in order to prep for the session, and then what are the auxiliary patterns that we're choosing to supplement the main compound output volume. And if some of the auxiliary patterns aren't moving that needle of function raising up, and the classic example here is like the single arm dumbbell skull crusher in order to increase shoulder stability for overhead pressing patterns. If some of those auxiliary movements aren't developing you in a manner that not only develops the physique, but it develops you functionally with your structural and functional
disadvantage,
disadvantages, then you're not taking the opportunity of writing a live program. And that's where I get a little bit frustrated with people training on templates, is like there's no consideration of outside of the main movers. What can we be doing in order to improve this lack of function that we see with this individual? So that may come within pre-session prep, that may come within the exercise selection post the main compounds, but we can still give priority to the tension drivers for the body parts we need to, and then address it within like later portions of the session where we're not really in an opportunity to take a lot of output. We're in an opportunity to drive net volume. Right? Where we're doing with that. So that's kind of like where you start to build out those solutions, is like, you can't address everything at once, right? But maybe we can move the needle on the ones that are the biggest.
Start off here, tweak, assess.
Yeah. And that's where like, even like I had a consult the other day where it was, I run programming coaching, where it's basically like I do the training side for someone, and I require.
I think you do it for one of my friends, Ben Shepherd.
Yes, I do. Ben, I'm working with Ben. And I require a weekly check-in process with that, because it's live documents. It's live documentation. Like, it should be representative of addressing the progress of issues over time. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been on a consult and people are like, you have people check in every week with training videos and a weekly basis so that you can go over that and see the progression within movement patterns. I'm like, yeah, I'm not just going to send you a training document and expect you to just follow it, right? Like, that's not how this should work. And I think that's where I'm starting to try to make that conversation, try to move in that direction, where we have people like myself and Nick Gloff and a couple others that are taking the time to do those kinds of things. And you're really going to see
it's very unique. Like, I'm listening to you and I'm like, I don't think I've seen that. Like,
no, but I think it's a thought process that needs to be out there, right? And give credit where credit's due. People like Jordan Shallow are really moving the needle forward when it comes to challenging people to think a little bit more critically around just meathead bodybuilder machine pump work. Because like, for those that are not genetically gifted, like, there's a lot that aren't your Kai Green. There's a lot on the table that's left when you do that, right? So It's an interesting dynamic. It's something that from a results standpoint for myself and my clientele has paid huge dividends, because a lot of times, like in your example, the weak body parts are addressing the lack of function that your structure presents. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. It's one that you're going to kind of have to work through on a day-to-day basis and a month-to-month basis, but and it can be challenging at times and frustrating.
Imagine there's certain people that almost argue the need for that for them, because I have clients send me form videos, and then I'll analyze them as much as I can on the day, but pretty much they'll go into a folder in Google Drive and I'll do that within their check-in. And it's very common for me to have to go, I don't want to see your warm-up sets. I do not want to see an empty bar. Like, if you can't move correctly with an empty bar, and then there's other times where they'll send me the absolute top set and I'm like, you did 2 reps. Like, come on, meet me in the middle here. And it's hard to kind of, because I imagine you're the same. You don't want warm-up sets, but you don't want absolute gruelers where actually your form's going to take a challenge from second rep because the load is
the only benefit to that is that you see the rate limiter in performance. And so that's why I do prefer the top sets a lot of times, is it exposes the rate limiter in their functional capacity the fastest. And so you see that. And because I'll be honest, man, like if a top set doesn't look, minus the speed at which the reps performed, the same from rep 1 to probably the rep before the failure rep or the failure rep, there's an issue there functionally that needs to be addressed, right? And so that's kind of where I do prefer the top set stuff.
Okay, that's cool.
Is because it exposes what is the rate limiter for that person, right? Like when I say rate limiter, just to kind of, it's the concept of what's the lowest hanging fruit, what's the first thing that jumps out that becomes a problem that we can correct, and now we move the needle forward because it's the biggest alarm within that set. And that's kind of where using top sets is very beneficial, is because if you're gonna fuck up, it's gonna be when you're required to perform at your highest capacity, right? So it's a very interesting dynamic to run with clientele, because you get some people who can't take a video all week because it's too hard to set up their camera, and
then you receive 20
or you receive 25 for a set for a session that has 15 sets in it. You're like, I don't even know how you took 25 videos. So communication is key, but I think that the top sets is probably the most valuable when it comes to finding the issues. Now, when it comes to solidifying form, probably back off sets and stuff like that for solidifying it across, like cueing and understanding and driving tension and things like that. But when it comes to identifying what that person's main problem is and what's the lowest hanging fruit for moving them forward, definitely going to be top sets. And that's where, like, people get mad about people videoing in a gym. I'm like, fuck yeah, video in the gym. Like, that's the best tool that you have for feedback, right? Especially if you coach yourself. Like, I don't trust anybody else's opinion. I train with my training partner every day and he still fucks up. Like, it's just one of those things, right? You can be a little
It's almost arrogance in your mind, isn't it? And I think we come from I was talking, a client messaged me today and he's like, my second movement, I think it's incline bench, I think it was. And he's like, I'm not progressing. He says, it's probably essentially because you're probably getting better at nailing that exercise with more efficiency, and you're fatiguing far quicker because you're getting more out of it. Yeah. As opposed to, like, I did it when I remember buying I won't say cookie cutter, but I bought a generic training plan off of Jordan Peters. It was one that we watched it. And I purchased that, and it was the first time I'd really been introduced to a top set and a back off. And there was rest pauses in there was muscle rounds, and having just a very brief description about progressive overload. I went into that and I become obsessed. But I come obsessed to the point that he didn't care. I cared about tempo. I cared about trying to keep my form. But if I had to speed those 3 or 4 reps up to beat that previous, I would. So the first three reps could take me 30 seconds, but the next 4 would have took me 10.
Yep.
Because I was progressive overload.
Yep. Which is where like the conversation of the internal stimulus comes into play.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we need to create the best internal progression and stimuli. So a logbook match with a better rep is a progression in my book, right? So, which is kind of getting into like the program mapping out, right? Because one of the things I do as I write a program is I kind of highlight, star, whatever you want to call it, the places where that can start to slip the most based on just what I know on the individual or what I see stereotypically, so that there is that kind of conversation of, okay, hey, let's make sure that this is internal progressions, that stimulus progression, and not strictly external. And it doesn't sell because it's not sexy, because it's not fuck yeah, blast the music, progressive logbook, let's go. But it's
smelling salts and a smack to the back of the back.
Man, don't you just love it when you see the videos of like the smelling salt whiff with the chalk on the back and just smack? Yeah. So, but it's what we need to do when it comes to physique progression. And don't get me wrong, like there should be a balance of like this objective conversation and moving someone forward and that enjoyment factor, which I'm never going to get mad at a client for getting a slap on the back with some chalk flying in the air and some loud music, and maybe the last 2 reps get a little bit out of whack. Like they're just having fucking fun, right? Like, and they're moving the needle forward. Like it's when it might turn into 3 reps from failure, 4 reps from failure, 5 reps from failure, and now getting sloppy, or is progressively getting worse every week, when it's like, okay, let's take a step back and look at maybe how we can be better here. So it's a fine balance to run. But I think it all starts with this conversation that we're having of making a needs analysis and then allowing the needs analysis to be a live document. Because the final piece of this is, as you address the issues functionally or whatever it may be, you're now ticking things off of that needs analysis. And so now it's like, okay, if we're not seeing the development we need, then maybe we need to adjust what the rate limiter for development is now for that body part, right? And so where, you know, it might be a document that someone just uses straight out the gate to write a program, it should be something that follows the client along. And so that's kind of
100%.
Things should differ.
So in the next episode, shall we go over kind of strategies around programming? So like start actually pulling up a document, going through that, and then people can see kind of, we've discussed your thought process around the consultation part through it being a live document, and then we kind of nail why we're doing this, what we're looking for within this, and volume to frequency kind of ideas.
And just maybe give some tools for addressing issues. Like when it comes to
we don't care about issues. You just train. We just move from A to B. No. I need to stop being a pighead and listen to my sports therapist and massage therapist and listen to this, and instead of saying, "Yeah, I'll stretch more," probably stretch more.
Well, that's been a fantastic conversation, man. Was there anything else you wanted to cover within?
I'm gonna get you to write my program, but we can discuss that after this. We discuss this after this call. So you've basically sold yourself, mate.
Hey,
I'm gonna sign up.
Here to help.
I think that's pretty much it, Luke. Really. What I will ask is, what's your current approach to training with yourself? Like, what are you running?
Yeah, so mine's an interesting split setup at the moment. So for those who don't know, I just came out of a contest prep. I'm like 3.5 weeks post prep. So
how much have you put on?
15-ish pounds, 16-ish pounds. I'm still.
You're not gone all that then?
No. I've only had 1 meal off plan since I stopped. So I'm like 16 pounds up. But that post-show phase is very important about restoring the capacity to be able to perform.
Going into a proper rebound kind of thing, rather than just
Yeah.
nailing it out the door?
Yeah. So the split setup right now is push, pull off, legs, push off, back hamstrings off. So a lot of rest days, frequencies kind of spread out a lot, but that's mainly because subs are at baseline TRT. We're only using the food vector as the main vector of progress right now, which is working really well. And so that those frequency landmarks will start to come in as my recovery capacity comes up, which will come up with some body fat accumulation and calories climbing up higher and implementation of supplementation and things like that. So again, my needs analysis showed I'm like you in that my front double is my worst shot. My back double is starting to get to where it's a better shot, but it's been one of my worser shots in the past. So really just kind of finding the main movements for the program within the priority principles I've already laid out, so that in a week or two, it's like program's fully set. It's no longer a live document and I'm just fucking ticking it. So
looking forward to it. Are you going to be like realistic? You're going to be documenting your like off season?
Yes, I will be. So sneak peek announcement, if y'all want, a YouTube page is coming soon. So that should be launching within the next week or two. The editor's working on the first video. So
What's the first video?
It's just going to be an introduction to No Switch Fitness. And what are we about? What do we do? Those kinds of things. And then we'll be doing a couple series. So we'll be doing one on my off season, one on my wife's. So she missed her pro card by a single placing this past year. So what are we doing to kind of come back the next time and shut the door? And then also one of my coaches under me, Olivia, is a WPD pro.
Okay, cool.
But she turned pro in figure. So talk a little bit about that journey from transferring up a class, what it's going to take. And then my other coach under me is a really good poser. So we'll be doing a lot of posing videos and things like that. So
that's cool. That's cool.
A lot of content on the way. Just need to kind of get
like this is, I don't know if you've got this covered, but I think from listening to what we've discussed today is you need to do a coaching kind of series where it's like going through this, because this shit excites me. Listening to this, like I've got my thought processes and brain. I'll be playing this back to myself to listen to tweak and get better within my initial consult stage.
Yeah, we're mapping out what that's going to look like, whether that's going to be YouTube.
You've got the sheets for it now, mate. You've got the sheets for it.
I know, right? You're hooking me up with the checking sheets. So
wait, I can't take any more work on, so stop there.
No, this has been fantastic, man. I think conversations
I've loved it.
For those who don't know, I'm really big on like trying to elevate the standard of the industry coaching, or elevate the standard at which coaches coach within our industry, so that I leave it better than I found it. And I think conversations like this move the needle in the right direction.
And it is going in the right direction. It's like, I'd say there's I'm not even going to talk on this because it'll be heated and we could talk for an hour. So I'm just going to address and say, yeah, it's getting better. There's still shit amongst the crop, but it's getting better. But right, thank you everyone. We will keep you posted on when the next one goes. Well, when we're filming the next one. And yeah, if you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, share, blah blah blah. Same old plug crap. But yeah, thank you very much. Cheers, Luke.